Hello, everybody. This is Corey Huff from The Abundant Artist. If you're over on Facebook Live or Crowdcast and you can hear me, type hello. This is now the universal sign for type. Okay, great. Perfect. Everybody can see us. Well, I am super excited to talk today to one of my oldest internet. You were like Megan. You were like one of the first people that I followed on Twitter. The Megan Auman.
Crazy.
Way back in the day when I started The Abundant Artist, and it was just a blog and it was just a side project, and I was like, let me figure out how creative people make money. Megan was like, I know. So I found Megan and crafting an MBA and the community that she ran back in the day with Tara Gentili all those years ago. And I have followed Megan, and we've run in the same professional circles for 10 years now, because this is the 10th year. This will be the 10th anniversary of The Abundant Artist. So
Wow.
Super excited to have Megan on today and talk about the internet and creativity. And maybe we'll talk about making bad art, but we are here today primarily to talk about wholesaling fine art prints.
Yes.
All right. And before we get too deep into the weeds on that, I just want to throw a couple things out. Like, we're not talking about selling out, or we're not talking about like making bad art intentionally just so that you can get it into insert big box store. What we're gonna talk about is how to take the art that you already make, mass manufacture it or mass print it, and get it into places that can sell hundreds or thousands of copies of those prints so that you can make a lot of money. I have worked with artists over the years who make as much as $20,000 or $30,000 a month from selling fine art prints. Those are definitely the exception. And for most artists, that I think that are selling the fine art prints can be a significant portion of your income, but it's usually not the whole thing. Okay. All of that said, if you have questions, feel free to post your question over in the Ask a Question section here on Crowdcast. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, go ahead and just leave a comment. We're happy to answer any of those. In addition to being somebody that I've admired for a long time on the internet, Megan is also a jewelry maker. You can see all of her stuff behind her there on screen. She makes necklaces. What are those things called? Bracelets. And and a bunch of other jewelry. So I'm excited to talk with her today. And hello to all you beautiful people. We've got over 50 people watching us live already. So hello, Rochelle, Edna, Gracie, Susan, Janet. We got people from Tucson and Portland and lots of places all around the globe. So Megan, hello. Thank you so much for being here. Excited to chat with you today.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. And it's fun. I love that you jumped into like, talking about selling big quantities of things. It's so interesting because so often I talk to makers and like, that's their fear of wholesale. They're like, oh my God, what if somebody places a giant order and what do I do? And here it's kind of like that, like, well, that's what I want. Like I want the giant order. And so it's kind of nice to see that. And also, just kind of as a point of focus, if that does scare you, this is definitely a process that can be as small or as big as you want it to be. So,
Yeah. So maybe we should talk a little bit to start with, if an artist is sort of at the early stages of their business and they're making some sales, but they're still figuring things out, and they want to add prints as one revenue source in their art business. Do you have any thoughts on how they should think about that and when it's a good idea to start selling prints?
Yeah. So, personally, I am a big fan of that. The sooner you can start making money, the better off you're going to be. I very firmly believe in this idea of like profit produces art. So the more profit you're making, the more money you're making, the more art you get to produce. And especially in the beginning of your business, it can be so hard to build up the audience, build up the collectors to sell expensive one-of-a-kind work, right? That's a challenge, especially in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So I think when you can sell prints, when you can manage that process, that gives you a leg up because you can start to generate income much more quickly. And then when you add on to that, the idea of wholesale, and I love wholesale for a couple of reasons. And the first one is that it is like by far the most proactive marketing strategy you can do in your business. So much of online marketing feels like sitting around and waiting to be discovered, right? Like I'm going to put the hashtags out. I'm going to do the SEO. You do the things, and I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to cross my fingers, and I'm going to hope that my right people find me. But with wholesale, you get to completely take control of the process. You get to say, you know what? I think these are the stores that are right for my work and my audience and my people, and this is going to connect me to them. And I'm going to find those stores, I'm going to identify them, and I am going to get my stuff together, and I'm going to reach out to them. So it's a completely proactive process that I think is a really great way to start generating money in the beginning. And I think for fine artists, what I love about it also is that it gets you out of that gallery commission cycle, which is so challenging, because when you're working with galleries and you're trying to sell originals and you're only working on commission, all the risk goes to the gallery owner. But in wholesale, they're buying up front. And yes, I think part of the reason we're talking about prints here is because prints are just so much more logistically easy for wholesale, and we can talk about why that is. But they're buying up front. At the most, they have net 30, or I saw some people asking about some bigger retailers. Bigger retailers might go net 60 or net 90. But at the end of the day,
can you just quickly explain what net 30 and net 60 are?
Yeah. So net 30 means they have 30 days to pay you after you ship the order and send the invoice. Net 60, then 60 days, net 90, 90 days. Net 30 is very common for small stores. The beauty of it is it's only usually common after the first order. So usually that first order, you can get paid up front, or even the first couple of orders, depending on the relationship. But even if you're getting paid a little bit, you're still guaranteed that you're getting paid. It's not, oh, I get paid after the work sells. It's I get paid after the order is placed or when the order is placed. So it just takes out that risk to you that selling with a gallery has. So it's a much more stable kind of, I don't know what I would say there. It's a much more stable revenue stream. That's the word I wanted, revenue stream. It's a much more stable revenue stream to add into your business, especially at the beginning.
Right. And there are a few different ways to sell wholesale, right? Like you can do a deal directly with a store, but there's also like companies that buy prints or license prints and sell those wholesale. So they're essentially like a third party in between company. And then there's a couple of other variations. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a couple of variations. And I think that one of the things that everybody immediately jumps to is this like, okay, I'm going to like wholesale my art, and I'm going to go for like the big box stores. I'm going to go for, I saw like Restoration Hardware pop up. I'm going to go for that, or I'm going to go for Anthropologie, or I'm going to go for some of those big stores. And a lot of those are dealing with more of that sort of middleman process, whether they're acting as the middleman or whether they're hiring companies to do that, right? So they have people who are going out, they're sourcing designs. You're almost more into that licensing world. But there are plenty of smaller stores that are looking for interesting things for their store that they are buying outright. And some of these might be individual boutiques. Some of them might be small chains. You could think about like, if you had art that worked really well for children, find a small chain of, children's clothing, children's home decor, whatever it is. They're looking for different products to round out their mix. And so your prints could fit perfectly in that. And in that case, you're dropping the middleman. It's you selling the prints, selling the work directly to the store.
Right.
I'm always a fan of jumping the middleman when you can.
Yeah, totally. There's a store here in Portland called Made Here, and they only sell stuff that's made in Oregon. And it's you actually see that in a lot of U.S. states. You'll see like at the airport or at a mall or something, you'll see some place that only sells stuff that supposedly is made in that state. But and I know that a handful of artists that I'm friends with have gotten their work into Made Here, and it's been a steady revenue source, right? Selling anywhere from 10 to 20 pieces each month or something like that. And then you multiply those small stores by the number of places you can get into. And, over the course of, if you do that, add one new store every few weeks or once a month, over the course of a year, you can start to add a pretty steady revenue source.
Oh, absolutely. There was a time I've sort of shifted a little bit of my business now, but where wholesale was like 80 to 90% of my jewelry revenue, because it's just that consistent. It's that, you just know, okay, this is the money, this is coming in. It's just such a consistent way to build a business, especially in the craziness of internet, Instagram algorithm changes. Like, and and I don't want to like sugarcoat here, because you always hear about like, oh, the retail apocalypse and stores are closing. And, it's definitely a different world. Wholesale feels different than it did when I started, 10, 11 years ago, but it's not an impossible world. And what I found is that a lot of the things that work, like those really basic, building the relationships with stores, getting them great product, understanding what works, that's still working. Some of the stores might have closed, but there's plenty of stores opening up. I'm finding I have a lot of friends who are my age, and even though I'm internet old, I'm not that old. So I have a lot of friends who are, especially in the wholesale world that I live in, I have a lot of friends who are my age who are opening these great brick and mortar stores, and they're doing really well because they're so savvy about blending their social media strategy and with their in-person marketing strategy. And so I think that you might be like, oh, like stores are dying, wholesale's dead. Like, I don't want to go this way. But I promise you, like, it's still a very, very viable way to build your business.
So eMarketer is like the go-to research firm for all things retail, right? And eMarketer estimates that more than 80%, I think it was like 84% of all retail sales still happen in brick and mortar stores. Yep. Right.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, because there's all of these headlines about how Amazon is destroying Main Street, but it's actually not true at all.
No, it's not.
There is a transformation where people who were used to doing business in an older way are struggling. And there are certain industries where definitely it's easier to buy things online, and certain cities where more people buy stuff online. But for the most part, most people still buy their stuff in person at a store where they can look at and touch the object.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that, not to go too much on a tangent of stores, but I think the other thing that I'm seeing a lot is that, stores that are succeeding, they're really thinking about different ways to get involved with the community. Like, I have a friend who made her store the CSA pickup point. So all summer long, every Thursday night, people had to come in and pick up their CSA stuff. And then she gave them a 10% discount while they were there. Right. So like,
CSA is community supported agriculture.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So they're picking up their food box every week. And then while they're there, they can shop the store as well. So, I think that's the thing is, right, you hear all of this negative stuff, but most people are still buying most of their stuff in stores, especially when it comes to gifting, which is a big brick and mortar thing, because people wait till the last minute. And unless you live in one of those nice little happy pockets with Amazon same-day delivery, I don't care how great it is, you're not getting your Amazon thing an hour later, but you can drive to the store and find something. So
it's funny because Walmart is something like 50 times bigger than Amazon as far as like what it sells.
Yeah.
So keep that in perspective. And Walmart's coming hard for Amazon. So
they really are.
Yeah. Okay. So I've decided that I want to go into wholesale, and maybe I have identified some of the local stores that I could work with. And maybe there's a couple of dream stores that I would love to get into, like Anthropologie or something. What's the next step?
All right. So before we do that, I just want to say that you do not have to think locally on this if your work does not sell locally. So I think that's so important, because it's a mistake that people make. They think like, okay, I'm going to approach the 3 local stores in my town and it's going to be awesome. And usually those end up being like the worst wholesale relationships for people. And sometimes they just don't work out. If I had tried to build a business on local stores, I would not have a wholesale business. This is the beauty of wholesale, is that instead of thinking about where you live, think about where your ideal customers live. So that's really something key that you want to think about, is don't limit yourself locally. But if you've decided, okay, I am ready, I'm going to start selling to stores. So there are a couple of things that you need to do to prepare. And the first is figure out your wholesale pricing. And that is really, really key. And this is something that a lot of people get wrong because they think about it backwards. So they think
this is a question that Colleen just asked.
I saw that in there. And so that is actually the backwards question, Colleen, which is, what percentage off of the retail price should I offer the store? And really with wholesale, you're thinking about it in the reverse. You're going to set your wholesale price, and then it gets marked up to the retail price. And so what happens is you want to set a wholesale price that is profitable for you. And then depending on the types of stores you're selling to and where they're located, a store is going to go anywhere between probably double and 2.5 times the wholesale price that you've set. I would say for most people, for prints, a 2 times markup is fairly standard. In my industry, in jewelry, you tend to see anywhere between 2.2 and 2.5. But again, I say it depends on the city, because probably any store in San Francisco is going to do a 2.5 markup because they have to, because real estate costs more there. Everything, I mean, everyone knows everything costs more in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So it's going to vary there.
Yeah, we have a large group of artists who really resent the fact that a gallery takes 50% of the sale price.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for artists everywhere to know that that this is the standard across all industries. It's not art galleries gouging artists for 50% of the retail price. This is how it works in every industry that sells a physical product.
Yes, it's super common to do that, right? Whether you look at it as 50% of or a double markup, it's super common. And I think one of the things that helps you think about that they're not gouging you is that most retail stores, I think their profit margin is somewhere around like 8%. So it's not like they're marking your stuff up and then they're like, woohoo, like party time, I'm making all this money. Stores have so much overhead that they have to cover. They have to cover the rent, they have to cover the electricity, they have to cover the staff. There's so much overhead in a store. So when they mark your work up, it's not because they're trying to rip you off. It's because that's literally the cost of doing business. But the way I see it then is that you know that a store is going to sell to that price, which means that there are people who are willing to pay that. And so you need to match that on your website. But the beauty is then when someone buys it on your website, look at all that extra profit you get.
Kind of extra money.
Yeah. So in my mind, like if you start out, and this is why I think also wholesale is good to think about from the beginning, because if you start out pricing your work so you're profitable at the wholesale level, you're going to be much more successful in the long run.
Yeah. So all of you artists who are out there selling $100 prints or $50 prints, you should probably start thinking about immediately doubling your prices so that you can continue selling at that price point and selling at the 50% price point to the retailers that are out there, so that your prices are the same across the board.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say too is as you're starting to get into this process, start to do your research with, what kinds of stores you think you're going to want to be in and what price point they're selling prints at. Because I think that's going to be it's going to answer a lot of questions for you that I can't answer. So I can see questions popping up like, well, are stores going to want them framed or unframed, or should they be in, a cello sleeve? Like how do they want it presented? And the answer is that completely varies from store to store. So something like a stationery store or a gift store is probably more likely to, want like the cardboard backing cello sleeve, really simple, kind of pick it up, lower price point, grab and go. But let's say you are selling prints to, again, like a high-end children's furniture boutique. They're going to want that stuff framed to hang on the wall that customers are like, oh, I love that crib, and let me just take the thing hanging over it. So it's really important to do your homework and think about the kind of stores your work fits in so that you can answer those questions.
Sorry, I've got a police car going by me. Okay. So Claire Mack says, I have a product that others are wanting to sell in their online stores, and I'm considering bulk pricing based on the number of items rather than 50% wholesale. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense. But I would say, again, that starts to kind of make me nervous anytime you're thinking about like, can I give them this little bit? Because I wouldn't be surprised if some of them take it and mark it up double anyway. So I would say start with this is the wholesale price. This is the doubled retail price, and just be really firm about that, because it starts to get really gray and murky, really tricky, especially if you're selling it to an online retailer, but then you start selling to bricks and mortar stores, because there is nothing that makes a store more upset than being undercut online.
Yes. And also making sure that your numbers for profitability in wholesale is really important, because if you do get into one of those dream retailers, especially if it's a place like IKEA or Walmart, their buyers are trained to negotiate your wholesale price down, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, usually by about 30% is the number that I tend to hear. I know a lot of people that, especially in the early days of when I was doing this, and everyone's dream store was Anthropologie. And so with that, it's always like they want 30% off your wholesale price. And for a lot of people, they didn't have those margins built in. And so they got these great orders, and it, they busted their butts to get them out. They really didn't make any money, and then they agreed to net 90, and so it took 90 days to get paid for this huge order. So you do want to think about that if those are the kinds of things you want, that any kind of big retailer is going to knock you down significantly. And those are some of the things where if they're coming in, it may be worth negotiating a licensing deal instead of that kind of deal. If you can't support those margins, all those places are set up to handle production. They have companies that make things for them. And so a licensing deal may be a better deal in the long run. So that's also a conversation. If you get approached by one of those stores, that's something to think about. And I actually think that a lot of those stores are moving to more of that model because they understand that a lot of, independent artists, independent makers can't handle the kinds of production needs that they have. And so a licensing deal ends up being better for everybody all around.
Yeah. If you're the kind of artist who you don't want to get into learning how to have your work mass manufactured, and you don't have much upfront capital, licensing deals can make a lot of sense for you. And that's why licensing deals are typically only around 10% or less of the retail price. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, with this conversation is that you have to think about, like, what are your goals, both financially and kind of professionally? But also, what kind of lifestyle do you want? Do you want to, just handle that licensing stuff and not have to worry about the production? Do you want to do the production so that you can keep more of the revenue, but it's kind of changing what your day-to-day looks like? So I think that's really important to consider too when you're thinking about all of this. But again, what I like about the wholesale piece is that in the beginning, it is such an easy, controlled way to start generating revenue without having to wait around for Restoration Hardware or Anthropologie to find you, right? You can start reaching out to people right away and start generating revenue.
Yep. Let's see.
So we haven't talked about line sheets yet. Can we talk about line sheets?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we sort of started on this conversation of like, what do I need to do to be ready? And the first thing is absolutely pricing. But then the second thing is that if you're really serious about wholesale, you're going to want a line sheet or something that basically communicates your wholesale prices. So basically it needs to communicate what the thing is, how big it is, how much it costs, and what the item number is to a store, because these are all the things that a store is going to use to order. Now, depending on how your online platform is set up, there are certainly ways that you can do it online and skip the line sheet. And I think this, again, depends on doing your customer research. So my store buyers tend to be older. I don't want to say they're afraid of the internet, but they tend to be a little bit more Luddite. And so they like a line sheet, even if it's emailed to them. They like a line sheet. They want to look at the line sheet, give me the order numbers, that kind of thing. But again, not to stereotype, but a lot of younger buyers are very comfortable if you're like, hey, you can go onto my website. Here's either the discount code or like on Shopify. I use a plugin on Shopify called Wholesale Hero. And that lets you automatically set your wholesale prices. And then a buyer logs in, I've marked them as a wholesale customer. And so they immediately get wholesale pricing. They can place their order done, which what I love about that is that they always have to pay up front. So I always get the money right away. So depending on who you're targeting, that might be another kind of quick way to solve this problem. But in the beginning, if you're selling both originals and prints and you're just wanting to wholesale your prints, a line sheet is definitely the way to go because it says, these are the things that are available to wholesale and these are not.
Right. So a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, I think you cover in on your blog and in your courses and stuff. And
yes.
Just for those who are like, where can I find examples of a line sheet or other things like that? Do you have resources like that on your website?
Yeah. So if you go to designinganmba.com, you can search wholesale and find some stuff on there. But I also have a class on CreativeLive. It's called How to Sell Your Products to Retailers. And it is literally 3 days of me telling you everything that you would ever want to know about wholesale. So yeah, how to sell your products to retailers on CreativeLive. And it's definitely, we talk a little bit about trade shows, but I spend a lot of time talking about how you can sell your work to stores without going to a trade show. And it's definitely something that I know works. I had an artist come and take one of my other CreativeLive classes. And he told me, he's like, oh, I watched your sell your products to retailers. And he sells prints. He said, I watched your sell the products to retailers. He's like, and I just did what you said. And I'd wake up every day and I would email stores. He's like, and now I'm in 30 stores.
Whoa.
And I was like, oh, perfect. Like, it does work. It's always nice to hear that. Yeah. So It's very, very possible to make this happen. And I think I was listening to an interview you did with somebody else a couple months ago, and it was talking about how some people are just like not comfortable marketing on the internet, which is another thing that I love about Wholesale is that if you're like, oh, like the internet marketing just drains me, if you can send an email, you can wholesale. Like that's literally all you need.
Right. I have some stuff. Do you want to buy it? Here's my portfolio.
Right. Like here's my line sheet. Here's my information. So easy. And that's really all you have to do. Yep. I mean, there's a little more nuance than that, but basically that's the gist of it.
But you can figure it out along the way too.
Yeah, exactly.
If people who are interested in your product will tell you, like if you don't have to get it perfect. They'll tell you, hey, I'm interested in your stuff. I looked at your portfolio. Can you send me whatever it is they need? Right.
Yes. And that is the other thing that I love about Wholesale is that buyers have a vested interest in selling your work. Like it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And so they will give you feedback. They will say, oh, these prints sold really well. These prints didn't. You know what? Like I'm getting a lot of feedback from customers that they wish it was bigger or smaller, or like people want to see it framed, whatever it is. You know, stores are on the front lines of interacting with customers in a way that you don't get on the internet. Like you basically, people show up on your website and either they buy it or they don't. And you usually don't know why. People in stores are not shy about expressing their opinion. And if you ask your buyers, if you build those relationships, you can start to learn that information and tailor what you're selling accordingly. So that's the other reason that I always tell people, it's better to start doing this sooner rather than later, because that feedback that you can get from buyers is invaluable. You might not even realize you're sitting on some really amazing things that could be selling super well. And you don't know that until you get it into a store.
Right. There's a couple of questions that are getting into the weeds of these things a little bit, and I want to dive into a few of them if it's okay with you. So Jennifer says, when we're talking about prints, are we talking about matted prints or prints with just backing board? And I think my response to this would be, it depends on which retailer you're working with. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is where it comes back to doing a little bit of research on the type of stores that you're hoping to sell to. Because something that kind of bills itself a little bit more as a gallery is going to probably want something that's a matted print or a framed print versus, again, something like a stationery store that is probably totally fine with a print on backing board versus, again, like a home decor store that's going to want something framed or maybe even, you know, reproductions on canvas. So really starting to do your research is going to help you answer those questions. And think about, right, like who you want to target, who your target audience is. And that could be based on aesthetic. It could be based on subject matter. It could be based on location. So there's so many variables, and that's why understanding your customers is actually really key to starting the wholesale process. Yeah,
totally. I'm just looking around at the prints that I have in my office right now. And like I've got one print over there that is a Kelly Ray Roberts wholesale piece. And that goes into like the anthropology type stores. I don't know if she's actually in anthropology, but sort of those kind of stores. And that is actually on, I forget the word for it. It's not plastic. It's like plastic.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, so there's that. And then I've got a framed print here that I bought directly from the artists themselves. And then I've got a couple of other prints that I just got at like local shops that were unframed, unbacked, and just like sitting in a plastic sleeve.
Yep.
Right. So it's all over the place.
Yeah. And so again, and it really depends. A lot of this depends on the price point of the store, because the more things you start adding to the print, the higher the price point is going to become. And so if you have a store that's mostly, you know, like a stationery and gift shop, and their average dollar value for a sale is like $40, you're not going to be selling framed prints for $300 there. You're just not. And so you have to kind of start to think about, again, who the audience is, what the store is, what the price point is. And some of that, again, comes back to just starting to put things out there and getting the feedback and seeing what works. And then part of it is also to what kind of, you know, brand you want to put out there in the world. If you're like, I only want to sell, you know, framed matted prints that start at $500 and go up, that is totally fine. But then you have to make sure that you're finding the kinds of stores that are going to sell that. You're probably looking at things that identify as galleries, but buy wholesale, which actually exists more than you think, especially in the craft world. Like those are the stores that I sell to a lot. Or, you know, home decor, furniture, things like that, where a $500 framed print is an impulse buy compared to like the $3,000 couch you're just about to purchase. So, really kind of thinking about what aligns with the way you want to put your work out into the world.
Yeah. So this is actually what you just said aligns really well with what Beth just asked. Beth says, for wholesale prints, does the pricing need to be lower for the retail market versus higher end fine art prints? He's a digital artist, and he usually only sells high-end archival prints for the gallery market, or she's a retail artist that only sells high-end archival prints for the gallery market. So yeah, there's the high-end gallery market, and then there's like a whole other world of a range from, local shops to everything else.
Right. And so I think that part of that is just figuring out where you want to be positioned. If you were to walk down a street that has like a great mix of boutiques, think of like a really cool downtown area, you're going to get like, okay, right, here's that more fine art gallery. Here is something that identifies as a gift shop, stationery shop, that kind of thing. Here's something in the middle that's like maybe about like handmade, local, whatever it is. And here's the other thing about wholesale. You can't sell to all those places on one street. You have to pick one in a geographic area. So like if there's a downtown main street, you get one store. You don't get to sell in all four, because that's not going to make a store very happy either. So you get to decide where you want to position, where you want to fall in that range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say a lot of artists will come and say, well, I need to be in galleries, or I need to be perceived in this certain high-end way because maybe you went to art school and you got your MFA and you've been taught and educated to portray yourself in a certain way. But that's not necessary for making money. And a lot of times it can be counterproductive if you're trying to only sell in certain high-end stores when your work actually might sell in other places that are not high-end galleries. So I always encourage artists to expand their thinking around that a little bit.
Yeah. And I will say I have an MFA. I went to art school. My MFA, my degree is in metalsmithing, but my thesis was actually sculpture. And so I look at my peers and I say, okay, well, like I know people who tried to do the like really conceptual work and the gallery thing. And those are not the people who are making a living selling their work. Now, some of them are absolutely, making a living as teachers or things like that. But at the end of the day, I had to decide, what, like, I'm not going to be in all those big name jewelry galleries that I idolized, but I'm going to make some money and I'm still going to love making my work. And so I'm much happier doing that. So I think it's one of those where you have to decide, where you want to go. And I also think there is something too about thinking I'm going to make prints, I'm going to make things that go in other kinds of stores and get my work to a lot more people, because there's something really beautiful about that. Like I'm actually a little jealous of all of you fine artists who are like, I can make really, in the grand scheme of things, very accessible, affordable prints. Mm-hmm. And I don't have that version of, I can't like just take my necklace and like
take a picture of your necklace and sell it as a print. Yeah.
I kind of wish I could. And so I think that's something to like really embrace. And also I will say, so this is something that, so I have an online community, Artists and Profit Makers, and this is something that we talk about, we've been talking about a lot in that community, which is that sometimes it's okay to have multiple brands. So you may decide that I want to have this really, and I actually have someone in my community who has this. She has this very like political, really statement making art. And she was like, this is really important to me, mm-hmm. but I also know that this is not going to pay my bills. And so she has this other brand, and it's the art is under her name, the brand is under something else. And she sells art prints and she sells, some paper goods. And that is her bread and butter line that pays the bills. And so if you need to separate them out, that's okay too.
Yes, absolutely. You can operate under a brush name.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So there's a few other questions here.
Yeah.
Colleen says, for a large retailer like Restoration Hardware, how many prints would they buy in a single purchase? And if they don't sell okay, go ahead. Well, go ahead and answer that, and then we'll take the second part.
Ask the second part of that, because I actually think that goes into it.
So if they don't sell the prints, would the artist be required to buy them back?
Yes. So this is why I often tell people that even though it sounds really awesome to be in like a Restoration Hardware or an Anthropologie, it's actually a lot more risk to you, because most of those places will in fact have buyback clauses in their contract. And so it's one of those where with a little store, they're going to say, this is what I want. And you're going to say, okay, we're going to fill the order. It's going to be good. When you're selling to those big stores, there's a lot more negotiation. There's a lot more that happens. There's contracts, there's buyback clauses. And so it's one of those where, again, it's not always all it's cracked up to be. And so I would say, to answer the first part of the question, that's a really tough one. You figure that they're probably going to start you small. So a lot of times what those big retailers will do is they'll pick like 5 stores. They're not going to buy an order for all of their stores globally because that's just, it's too much risk. So they might pick like 5 stores that they're going to try it out in. And then depending on what the presentation is, they might only buy, 1 or 2 per store. So a lot of stores I think are doing more of this kind of trial thing. And then from there, you're negotiating. The other thing that's so important to remember about a place like Restoration Hardware, Anthropologie, or any big store is that it's a much longer time frame, right? They are shopping for usually about a year in advance. Whereas,
that's such a great point. Yes.
Yes. So they're shopping for a year in advance. So it actually negates that whole, like, I'm going to make some money quickly thing, because it's such a long drawn out process. Whereas if you're going, okay, you know what, here's what I'm going to do instead. This is what I personally would do. I would find independent furniture stores that have an aesthetic similar to Restoration Hardware. And I would start sending those emails, put that line sheet together, send those emails, because that's going to generate revenue so much more quickly. And none of that really precludes you from eventually getting that Restoration Hardware deal, because usually they're in 2 different spots in a city. You could sell to both. It would be totally fine. But I would start with those smaller stores. It also is going to just help you understand what buyers are looking for. I know I'm kind of vague in answering some of these questions, but that's because it literally varies from store to store. And the only way to know is to start putting the work out there and having conversations with stores.
Yeah. And you will learn so much just by going through the act of reaching out to these stores and talking to them. Because the buyers will say, yes, no, or I need this to know. Right. And you just have to like face up the rejection and suck it up. Do you have any advice for researching and finding which stores you should put your work in?
Yes. So I am like a total research nerd. So this is one of my favorite topics. And so the first thing that I say, I know that conventional wisdom is like, find someone who sells something like you and then go to their website and look at their stockist list. But the problem is, if they're too similar to you, the store is not going to pick you up because they already have something filling that. Yep. So I always think start with who your target market is, and what are complementary brands. So again, I'm just going to go back to this like children's boutique analogy again, because it's such an easy one to kind of wrap your head around. But if you're like, okay, I know I want to sell to places that cater to children, children's clothes, children's boutiques. What are some complementary brands, right? Is there a clothing brand? Is there a children's furniture brand that these stores might be carrying? Then go to their website and look at their stockist list, because that's going to be like, okay, these are some potential places. So for me, like I will often look at, I'll look at, and once you get in stores, it becomes easier too. Like I will look at, say, oh, okay, like actually a fair amount of my stores sell hobo bags. Okay, well, who else does Hobo sell their bags to? And that's a much bigger company than I am. So that's a huge list of stores that I can reach out to. So that's the first way I would approach that. The second way is that I'm a big fan of just looking at like shopping guides and travel guides for cities or regions that you're in. And again, this is where like you don't have to start local. So if you know, like, oh man, I get a lot of like online orders from the Bay Area, I would be searching like best boutiques in San Francisco, best stationery stores in San Francisco. If you're traveling and you're in the airport, like look for those shopping guides. I always like, I'll pick those up and like sit in the plane and like circle the stores I want to reach out to. Awesome. So thinking about, right, like areas of the country that make sense for your work. I always tell people, where does your ideal customer go on vacation? Because people are so much more likely to shop in a brick and mortar store on vacation because they want a souvenir. So if you can think about where your ideal people go on vacation and then identify stores there, that's going to be like a huge moneymaker for you.
Nice. Yes, I love that so much. Like figuring like that's such a like a researchy thing to do. Like go and find the other brands that sell in the same places you sell and sell next to them. I love it.
Yeah,
that's some ninja marketing right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you sell this, Beth says, if you sell to small stores, is there a recommended minimum that the store needs to order?
Yes, that is a great question. And you can approach your minimum in two ways. So one is a dollar amount, and then one is a per piece minimum. And with prints, there's actually the overall per piece minimum, like your order has to contain 12 prints. And then there is, do you want to give them an individual print minimum? Like, do you want them to have to buy 2 of each print? And again, with a lot of these, it comes back to like, what are the kinds of stores you're selling to and sort of what's normal in your industry. And then what your price points are. So I personally, in my jewelry, use a dollar minimum because I have a big range of price points. And so if I were to say like, my minimum is 4 pieces and they buy 4 $40 earrings, like that's a sucky thing to put in the store, right? That's not enough to give me a present. And so I say like, you have to spend $450 with me because I know that that's going to get you to a good grouping. And actually I recently raised it to 600 because I was like, well, if they're spending $450, they're usually writing a $600 order anyway. So let's start there. So what you want to think about is, again, what kind of store and what kind of presence does it make sense to have in the store for your work to sell? So if you're selling, say, prints on backing board to like stationery stores, you're going to have a lower minimum. Either it's going to be like maybe 6 prints or $150 or whatever it is. It's going to be lower than if you're selling to something a little more high end and your product price point is higher. And so again, this is where you kind of play around and see. I personally don't like any kind of minimum under like $200 because I can't deal. But if you're doing it's like, to me, it's like not worth it. But I will say if you're doing like a lower price product mix, or you have, more stationary type products, like if you decided you're doing prints plus notebooks plus greeting cards, that industry typically tends to be like $150 as a starting point. That said, you don't always have to follow that. But you kind of want to play around and see what makes sense. I always feel like if you're going to do a dollar amount, make sure that they can't like figure out what's the dollar amount if they were going to buy like 6 good pieces, and at least start there.
Right.
And I would also say too, for prints, I probably wouldn't do, I would probably let people order singles of prints unless it's really annoying. But if you're selling other kinds of stationery like notebooks, greeting cards, things like that, definitely make them buy multiples of each thing because it's just not worth it to have one notebook sitting in a store.
Right. Okay. So we're coming up on the end of our time here. We'll wrap it up here in just a minute. But Fresh Design asks, what do you think about companies like Zazzle or Etsy for sales? And let's kind of keep this to wholesale because selling Zazzle and Etsy retail is like a whole other conversation. But I know that Etsy has they do some wholesale stuff, but I'd love your thoughts. They
do, but they're actually closing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say, I would kind of move on from that. I think the problem, I'm not familiar with Zazzle, but I'm assuming it's print on demand, right? It's one of those print on demand. Yeah. So I think the problem with a lot of like the print on demand stuff is that there's not a ton of margin in there to wholesale. And so if you're really thinking about wholesale, you may want to think about, actually how to produce the prints on your own, or partner with someone where you can actually place an order instead of doing print on demand. That said, I think that a lot of those print on demand places can be good information for sort of where to start a wholesale line. If you have, images, prints, whatever on there that are getting more attention, more sales, that's a good place to kind of help you start and maybe get some information. But I definitely think for wholesale, you're probably going to have to look at other means of production. And yeah, the Etsy wholesale thing, they really wanted it to work. And it just never became a big part of their thing. But I always think, again, how can you cut out the middleman? And why do you need Etsy if you can just do your research and send your emails and reach out to your stores? There's no need to, give Etsy a cut or have them broker for you, when wholesale is just so easy to just get out there and do the work and reach out to people yourself. You don't have to wait around for it.
Nice. Well, Megan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and to talk. If people wanted to find out more about you, where should they reach out?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, Designing an MBA. It's designinganmba.com. You can also follow me on Instagram or Twitter. I am at Megan Auman on both of those places. I'm pretty much at Megan Auman everywhere on the internet, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, wherever. I'm like at Megan Auman everywhere. And again, Designing an MBA. And then my newest site is artistsandprofitmakers.com. Where I work a lot, especially if you're looking for things like feedback on your line sheet and wholesale. I work with people. It's my online mentorship program. So if you're like, I don't know, is this a good line sheet? Like I will literally sit down and look at your line sheet and tell you if it's good or bad, or if your prices are good or bad. So you can find me there as well.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Megan. Thanks,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Bye.